For 300 years, the galaxy watched worlds burn. The hegemony swept through star systems like wildfire through dry grass, their massive fleets blotting out suns as they claimed planet after planet. Advanced civilizations that had stood for millennia crumbled in days. The proud Altarians, masters of quantum technology, fell in 72 hours. The crystalline Vexhi, who could manipulate matter at the molecular level, lasted barely a week. Even the ancient Drakmari Empire, with their billion-year legacy of conquest, was reduced to scattered refugees within a single solar cycle. No one could stop them. No one even slowed them down. Until the day a small, blue-green world in an unremarkable spiral arm decided that retreat was not an option. Until humanity looked at the approaching darkness and said two simple words that would echo across the galaxy: not today. What happened next would rewrite the laws of war, challenge the very nature of what it meant to be civilized, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous predator in the universe is the one that fights not for conquest, but for home. This is the story of how humanity's fleet blocked the stars, and why the galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Sarah Chun stood before the massive holographic display in the Terran Defense Command Center, watching red markers advance across the galactic map like drops of blood spreading through water. Each marker represented a hegemony fleet group, and each fleet group meant another civilization would soon join the growing list of the extinct. The latest reports were grim. The Centauri Federation had fallen 3 days ago, their proud fleets scattered like leaves in a hurricane. Before that, it was the Rigel Commonwealth, the Vega Alliance, and dozens of smaller worlds whose names would soon be forgotten by all but the archivists. The pattern was always the same. The hegemony arrived, demanded surrender, and when it was inevitably refused, they demonstrated why resistance was futile. "How long do we have?" Chun asked, her weathered face reflecting the cold light of the tactical display. Captain Marcus Rodriguez, her chief intelligence officer, consulted his datapad with hands that trembled slightly. He'd been tracking the hegemony's advance for months, watching helplessly as they consumed everything in their path. Based on their current rate of advance and the time needed to consolidate each conquered system, I estimate 18 months before they reach the outer colonies. Maybe 24 if they encounter unexpected resistance. Which they won't, added Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenobiologist who had become humanity's foremost expert on hegemony tactics simply by virtue of being one of the few survivors to escape their initial encounters. They don't just destroy armies, Sarah. They study them, learn from them, adapt. By the time they reach us, they'll have incorporated the best technologies and tactics from every species they've conquered. She nodded grimly. She'd read the reports, watched the fragmentary recordings that refugee ships had managed to smuggle out. The hegemony wasn't just a military force. It was an evolutionary engine, constantly improving itself with each victory. Their ships grew stronger, their tactics more refined, their technology more sophisticated. They weren't just conquering the galaxy. They were perfecting themselves through conquest. The command center's main screen shifted to display the latest intelligence briefing. Images of hegemony vessels floated in the darkness of space, their sleek, predatory forms bristling with weapons that defied conventional understanding. The ships themselves seemed to pulse with a dark energy, their hulls shifting and adapting in real time to counter incoming threats. "Look at these readings," Dr. Vasquez continued, highlighting specific sensor data. Their hull plating adjusts its molecular structure to deflect energy weapons. Their shields modulate frequency to counter projectile attacks. And that's just their defensive systems. Their weapons. She paused, struggling with the implications of her own research. They don't just destroy. They convert. Matter, energy, even biological tissue. They turn everything they touch into more of themselves. Captain Rodriguez cleared his throat. "There's something else." Our deep space monitors picked up a transmission from the ruins of Altair Prime. "It's disturbing." He activated a recording, and the conference room filled with static and the desperate voice of an Altarian communications officer. "This is Altair Defense Station 7. The planet, The planet is gone. Not destroyed, gone. They're taking it apart atom by atom, feeding it to their ships. The cities, the oceans, the mountains, it's all being consumed. They're not just killing us, they're erasing us. As if we never existed at all. The transmission dissolved into static, leaving the room in heavy silence. Chun stared at the dead channel, feeling the weight of 10 billion human lives pressing down on her shoulders. Earth, Mars, the colonies scattered across dozens of star systems, all the dreams and achievements of humanity's expansion into space, all of it hung in the balance. What about the other species? Chun asked finally. The ones that survived initial contact. Surely some of them must be organizing a resistance? Dr. Vasquez pulled up another display, this one showing refugee concentrations and the scattered remnants of once mighty civilizations. They're trying, but the problem is coordination. The hegemony doesn't just conquer, it isolates. They destroy communication networks, eliminate leadership structures, scatter populations. What's left are fragments, too broken and terrified to mount any meaningful resistance. The Drachmarie are still fighting, Rodriguez added, though his tone suggested it wasn't good news. Or at least, they're still dying. Their emperor refuses to surrender, but their fleets are down to perhaps 5% of their original strength. At current attrition rates, they have maybe 6 months left. Chun walked to the viewport that dominated the far wall of the command center. Beyond the reinforced transparent aluminum, Earth hung in space like a blue jewel against the void. Clouds swirled across continents where billions of people live their lives, unaware that their entire species stood on the brink of extinction. There has to be something, she murmured, more to herself than to the others. Some weakness, some flaw in their strategy. Nothing is invincible. Admiral, Dr. Vasquez said carefully, I've been studying their expansion patterns, trying to understand their methodology. There might be something, but it's unconventional. Chun turned back to face the xenobiologist. I'm listening. Vasquez manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on specific star systems where the hegemony had passed through. They always follow the same pattern. Arrive, demand surrender, demonstrate overwhelming force, consolidate resources, move on. It's efficient, ruthless, and it's worked on every species they've encountered. But there's an assumption built into that strategy, which is that their targets will behave rationally, that when faced with extinction, they'll choose survival over principle, that they'll surrender when resistance becomes futile. Vasquez paused, meeting the Admiral's gaze. But what if they encountered a species that didn't? Rodriguez frowned. You're talking about suicide, mass extinction as a military tactic. I'm talking about something the hegemony has never encountered, Vasquez replied. A species that values something more than survival. The Altarians valued knowledge, so they try to preserve their libraries and data cores. The Vexi valued beauty, so they attempted to save their artwork and cultural monuments. The Drachmarie value honor, so they fight to the last ship in glorious battle. But what if they faced a species that valued freedom more than existence itself? Chun felt a chill run down her spine as she began to understand. You're suggesting we find a way to make conquest more costly than it's worth. I'm suggesting we find a way to make it impossible, Vasquez corrected. The hegemony's strength comes from accumulation. They grow stronger with each victory, each world they consume, each technology they acquire. But what if we found a way to deny them that? What if, instead of feeding their growth, we starve them? The Admiral moved back to the tactical display, studying the advancing red markers with new eyes. Ow, I don't know yet, Vasquez admitted. But I think the answer lies in understanding not just how they fight, but why they fight. What drives them? What do they ultimately want? If we can understand their motivation, maybe we can find a way to turn it against them. Rodriguez was already pulling up files on his datapad. I'll coordinate with our intelligence networks, see what information we can gather from the refugee populations. Maybe someone escaped with data about hegemony command structure, decision-making processes, something that could give us insight into their psychology. Chun nodded approvingly. Do it. And I want every military theorist, every xenopsychologist, every unconventional warfare specialist we have working on this. If there's a way to stop them, we'll find it. And if there isn't, Rodriguez asked quietly. The Admiral looked back at the viewport, at the planet that had birthed humanity and sent its children to the stars. Then, we make them pay such a price for Earth that they'll remember us long after we're gone. But Marcus? Yes, ma'am. I don't believe in lost causes. Humanity didn't crawl out of caves and reach for the stars by accepting defeat. We're going to find a way. As the meeting broke up and her staff dispersed to their tasks, Chen remained before the tactical display, watching the red tide advance. Somewhere out there in the darkness, the hegemony continued its inexorable approach, consuming worlds with machine-like efficiency. But for the first time since the crisis began, she felt something other than despair. She felt the beginning of an idea. The next few days brought a flood of intelligence as refugee ships continued to arrive at the edges of human space. Each vessel carried survivors with tales of horror and loss, but also precious information about their conquerors. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of the hegemony's true nature. They weren't simply another aggressive species seeking territory or resources. They were something far more disturbing. A collective intelligence that existed not in any single form, but in the connections between countless individual components. Their ships, their soldiers, even their weapons were all part of a vast, interconnected organism that learned and adapted with each encounter. Dr. Vasquez compiled the data into a comprehensive report that chilled everyone who read it. The hegemony wasn't just conquering the galaxy. It was becoming the galaxy, absorbing everything it encountered into its collective consciousness. Every world they consumed, every species they conquered, every technology they assimilated made them stronger, smarter, and more dangerous. But the reports also revealed something else. The hegemony's expansion followed predictable patterns because it was driven by an insatiable hunger for new experiences, new knowledge, new forms of existence to integrate into itself. It moved from system to system not just for conquest, but for consumption. Each victory fed its growth. Each defeated species added new capabilities to its arsenal. It's like a virus, Chun said, reviewing the latest analysis. A virus that doesn't just destroy its host, but becomes it, which means, Dr. Vasquez added, that it can only grow by consuming. If we could find a way to cut off that consumption, to deny it new sources of growth, we could starve it, Rodriguez finished. But how do you starve something that feeds on entire civilizations? The answer came from an unexpected source, a young lieutenant named Alex Kowalski, who had been quietly analyzing communication intercepts from refugee ships. He approached Chun during one of her rare breaks, his face bearing the expression of someone who had either discovered something important or was about to be court-martialed for wasting his superior's time. "Admiral," he began hesitantly, "I think I found something in the Drachmarie transmissions. It's probably nothing, but let me be the judge of that, Lieutenant." Kowalski activated his datapad, displaying a series of encrypted Drachmarie communications that had been intercepted over the past several weeks. These are tactical reports from their surviving fleet commanders. Most of it is what you'd expect: casualty reports, supply shortages, desperate requests for reinforcement. But buried in the tactical assessments, there's something odd. He highlighted specific sections of the communications. The Drachmarie have been tracking hegemony fleet movements, trying to predict their next targets. But, according to their data, there's been a change in the pattern. Small but consistent. The hegemony has started avoiding certain types of star systems. Chen leaned forward, suddenly interested. What types? Systems with unstable stars, heavy radiation fields, areas of space with unusual gravitational phenomena. At first, the Drachmarie assumed it was just tactical prudence. Why fight in a dangerous environment when you don't have to? But the pattern is too consistent. It's almost like the hegemony is afraid of something. Dr. Vasquez joined them, studying the data with growing excitement. This could be significant. If the hegemony collective consciousness relies on maintaining constant communication between its components, then Environmental interference could disrupt that connection. Like jamming a radio signal, Rodriguez added, understanding beginning to dawn in his voice. Chun stared at the data, pieces of a larger puzzle starting to fall into place. Lieutenant, I want you to cross-reference this with every piece of intelligence we have on hegemony fleet composition and behavior. Look for any other anomalies, any deviations from their standard pattern. And I want it yesterday. As Kowalski hurried away, Chun turned to her senior staff. If the hegemony can be disrupted by environmental factors, then maybe we can create those factors artificially. What kind of interference would it take to sever their communications network? Substantial, Dr. Vasquez replied, her mind already racing through possibilities. We'd be talking about massive electromagnetic pulses, gravitational distortions, possibly even localized space-time disruptions. The energy requirements alone would be enormous. But not impossible. Not impossible, Vasquez confirmed. Difficult, dangerous, and probably suicidal for anyone attempting it, but not impossible. Chun felt the first stirrings of hope she'd experienced in months. Then, we have our answer. We don't try to outfight them. We try to outthink them. We find a way to turn their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The plan that began to take shape over the following weeks was audacious beyond anything humanity had ever attempted. It would require sacrifices that made previous military campaigns seem like minor skirmishes. It would demand technological innovations that pushed the boundaries of human knowledge. And it would depend on the willingness of an entire species to risk everything for a chance at survival. But as Admiral Chun looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere in that darkness an implacable enemy approached, she knew they had no choice but to try. The galaxy had watched worlds fall easily to the hegemony for 3 centuries. It was time to show them what happened when the prey decided to fight back. The war room beneath the Terran Defense Headquarters hummed with desperate activity as humanity's finest minds worked around the clock on what had become known as the Starfall Protocol. Admiral Chun moved between workstations where physicists, engineers, and military strategists collaborated on humanity's last desperate gambit. The air itself seemed charged with urgency as teams raced against time to turn theoretical impossibilities into battlefield realities. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before a massive holographic projection showing the internal structure of a modified human dreadnought. The ship bore little resemblance to its original design. Every available space had been crammed with experimental technology that pushed the boundaries of known science. The quantum resonance generators are the key, she explained to the assembled team. By creating localized disruptions in subspace, we can effectively jam the hegemony's collective consciousness network. Captain Rodriguez studied the schematics with a mixture of admiration and horror. The power requirements are insane. We're talking about channeling the entire output of a star through these resonance chambers. One miscalculation and the ship doesn't just explode, it takes half the solar system with it. Which is why we need volunteers, Chin said grimly. The Admiral had aged years in the past few months, the weight of human survival etched in the lines around her eyes. Crews who understand that this is a one-way mission. The quantum resonance effect will tear the ships apart from the inside out, but not before they accomplish their objective. Lieutenant Kowalski, now promoted to head of intelligence analysis, pulled up new data from the outer monitoring stations. Admiral, we're getting reports from the Kepler sector. The hegemony has engaged the last Drachmary fleet. Based on current engagement patterns, the Drachmary will be extinct within 72 hours. The room fell silent as that reality sank in. The Drachmary Empire had stood for over 1 billion years, conquering dozens of star systems and establishing themselves as one of the galaxy's dominant powers. If they could be eliminated so quickly, what chance did humanity have with its mere 300 years of space travel? How long until they reach our outer colonies? Chin asked, though she already knew the answer would be worse than their last estimate. 8 months, Kowalski replied. Maybe less if they don't stop to consolidate the Drachmary territories. The pattern suggests they're accelerating their advance. possibly in response to intelligence indicating organized resistance. Dr. Vasquez manipulated the holographic display to show a three-dimensional map of human space. Red arrows indicated the most likely hegemony approach routes, converging on Earth like the points of a vast spear. We have 47 colonies spread across 23 star systems. Even if the Starfall protocol works, we can't protect them all. We're not going to try, Chun said, her voice carrying the weight of terrible necessity. We're going to evacuate what we can and abandon the rest. Every ship, every resource, every human life we can save gets pulled back to the Sol system for a final stand. The implications of that decision rippled through the room. Humanity's expansion into space represented the dreams and sacrifices of generations. Entire worlds have been terraformed, civilizations built, families raised across the vastness of space. Now all of it would be sacrificed to buy time for one desperate throw of the dice. The evacuation is already underway, Rodriguez reported, his voice carefully neutral. We've managed to pull approximately 60% of the colonial population back to the inner systems. The rest. He didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what happened to populations that couldn't escape before the hegemony arrived. What about the other species? Asked Dr. Sarah Kim, the team's xenopsychologist. The survivors who made it to our space. Are they willing to participate in the protocol? Dr. Vasquez consulted her datapad. Mixed responses. The Altarian refugees are enthusiastic. They see it as a chance to use their quantum manipulation expertise for something other than running and hiding. The Vexi crystalline entities are skeptical, but willing to contribute their matter-shaping abilities. As for the Drakmarie survivors, she paused. They think we're insane, but they respect the audacity. Several of their ship commanders have volunteered for what they're calling the final honor. Shin nodded approvingly. Good. We'll need every advantage we can get. What's the status on the quantum resonance generators? Dr. James Crawford, the project's chief engineer, wiped sweat from his forehead as he approached with a tablet full of technical specifications. We've managed to build 12 functional units. Each one is roughly the size of a city block and requires the power output of a small star to operate. The engineering team estimates we can produce maybe 6 more before the deadline, assuming we cannibalize half the remaining fleet for parts. Do it, Chun ordered without hesitation. Strip every non-essential ship down to the hull if you have to. What about the delivery system? That's where things get complicated, Crawford continued. The resonance generators have to be positioned in a specific geometric pattern around the target area to create an overlapping disruption field. Too close together, and they interfere with each other. Too far apart, and the effect dissipates. We're talking about a deployment pattern that spans several light years. Captain Rodriguez studied the tactical implications. That means our ships will be operating independently, unable to provide mutual support. Once they activate the generators, they'll be cut off from all communication and backup. Worse than that, Dr. Vasquez added. The quantum disruption field will affect our technology as well. Our ship's computers, navigation systems, even basic life support will begin to fail once the resonance reaches full power. The crews will have maybe 30 minutes before their ships become uninhabitable. Lieutenant Kowalski looked up from his analysis station. Admiral, I'm seeing some concerning patterns in the latest hegemony movement data. They're not just advancing randomly anymore. Their fleets are coordinating across multiple sectors, executing complex maneuvers that suggest they're aware of potential resistance. Chun felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying they know we're planning something? I'm saying they're acting like they do. Look at these fleet positions. Kowalski highlighted several areas on the tactical display. They're establishing overlapping coverage patterns, creating redundant advance routes, positioning reserve forces in key strategic locations. This isn't the behavior of a force that expects easy conquest. Dr. Kim leaned forward, studying the data with professional interest. This could actually work in our favor. If the hegemony is expecting conventional resistance, they might not be prepared for the Starfall protocol. Their countermeasures will be designed to deal with traditional military tactics, not localized space-time disruption. Or Rodriguez countered grimly. They've encountered something like this before, and they're taking precautions. Remember, they've been conquering civilizations for centuries. It's possible that some other species tried a similar desperate gambit. Chun weighed the possibilities, knowing that either way, they were committed to their course of action. It doesn't matter. Even if they know exactly what we're planning, we still have to try. The alternative is extinction. She moved to the central command console, activating the fleet-wide communication system. All stations, this is Admiral Chun. Initiate Operation Starfall. All participating vessels report to your designated deployment coordinates. Godspeed. And remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for the right of free beings to exist in this galaxy. Across human space, the most desperate military operation in the species' history began to unfold. Ships that had been converted from exploration vessels, cargo haulers, and passenger liners into improvised weapons platforms made their way to positions throughout the Sol system. Each vessel carried one of the massive quantum resonance generators and a crew that had volunteered for what everyone understood to be a suicide mission. Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge of the converted freighter Hope's Edge, watching the quantum resonance generator being loaded into her ship's cargo holds. The device was a marvel of desperate engineering. Crystalline matrices salvaged from Vexi technology interfaced with human quantum computers and powered by miniaturized stellar cores that the Altarians had helped design. It looked less like a weapon than a piece of abstract art, all flowing curves and impossible angles that hurt to look at directly. Final systems check complete, Captain, reported her chief engineer, a grizzled veteran named Thompson who had volunteered despite having grandchildren on Mars. The resonance chamber is stable, power coupling is secure, and the activation sequence is loaded into the computer core. Santos nodded, trying not to think about what that activation sequence would do to everyone aboard her ship. The quantum resonance field would disrupt the molecular bonds that held matter together, effectively dissolving anything within its range. The technical description made it sound clean and scientific, but the reality would be far messier. Time to target zone? She asked. 47 minutes at current velocity, replied her navigator, Lieutenant Chong. The young officer's voice was steady, but Santos could see his hands trembling slightly as he worked his console. All other Starfall vessels report on schedule for simultaneous deployment. Around the Sol system, 17 other ships were making similar journeys to their assigned coordinates. Each vessel carried not just a quantum resonance generator, but the hopes and fears of an entire species. They came from every corner of human space. Merchant captains, exploration crews, military veterans, and civilian volunteers who had simply refused to sit idle while their species faced extinction. The plan was elegantly simple in concept and terrifyingly complex in execution. The 18 ships would position themselves in a precise geometric pattern around the projected hegemony approach vector. When the enemy fleet arrived, expecting to find a demoralized and scattered human resistance, they would instead encounter a carefully prepared trap. The quantum resonance generators would activate simultaneously, creating overlapping fields of space-time disruption that would sever the connections holding the hegemony's collective consciousness together. In theory, this would cause their fleet to lose cohesion and coordination, turning their greatest strength into a fatal weakness. Individual hegemony ships would find themselves cut off from the collective, unable to share information or coordinate tactics. Without the benefit of their shared consciousness, they would become vulnerable to conventional military attack. In practice, no one was entirely sure what would happen. The quantum resonance technology had been tested only in computer simulations and small-scale laboratory experiments. Deploying it on such a massive scale was an act of pure desperation backed by theoretical physics and hope. Captain, Lieutenant Chun announced, "We're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Chun." Santos activated the communication system, and the Admiral's familiar voice filled the bridge. "All Starfall vessels, this is command. Long-range sensors have detected the Hegemony Advanced Fleet. Estimated arrival in 37 hours. You know what this means? We're committed now. There's no turning back. The transmission continued with final operational details, backup communication protocols, and the coded authorization sequences that would activate the quantum resonance generators. But Santos barely heard the technical information. Instead, she found herself thinking about the chain of events that had brought humanity to this point. 300 years ago, humans had been confined to a single world, dreaming of reaching the stars. Now, those same humans were preparing to sacrifice everything they had built among those stars for the chance to remain free. It was, she reflected, exactly the kind of magnificently insane gesture that defined her species. All stations, she announced to her crew, prepare for final approach to deployment zone. Remember, we're not just carrying a weapon, we're carrying a message. We're telling the galaxy that some things are worth more than survival. As the Hope's Edge continued its journey toward the coordinates that would mark either humanity's greatest victory or its final stand, similar scenes played out aboard 17 other vessels. Crews said their goodbyes, made their peace with approaching death, and prepared to write the last chapter of human space exploration with their own lives. Behind them, the remnants of humanity's civilian fleet continued the massive evacuation of the outer colonies. Millions of people crowded aboard ships never designed for such cargo, abandoning homes and dreams to seek refuge in the inner system. The lucky ones would make it to Earth or Mars before the shooting started. The unlucky ones would become refugees in the truest sense, wandering the galaxy in search of a new home that might not exist. But ahead of them, 18 ships carried something more precious than refugees or resources. They carried hope, wrapped in quantum physics and powered by the stubborn refusal of an entire species to go quietly into extinction. The galaxy had watched worlds fall easily to the hegemony for 3 centuries. Soon, it would discover what happened when a species decided that freedom was worth any price, even the ultimate one. The hegemony's arrival shattered the peaceful darkness of space like a cancer metastasizing through healthy tissue. Their fleet emerged from hyperspace not as individual ships, but as a single, writhing organism of dark metal and malevolent purpose. The vessels themselves defied conventional understanding. Surfaces that flowed like liquid while maintaining solid form, weapons that seemed to grow from the hulls like organic appendages, and an overwhelming sense of wrongness that made human sensors scream warnings in languages that didn't exist. Admiral Chun watched from the command center on Luna, her face illuminated by the hellish light of the tactical display. The enemy fleet was massive beyond anything their intelligence had suggested. Not hundreds of ships, but thousands stretching across light years of space in a formation that pulsed with synchronized malevolence. Each vessel was unique yet part of a greater whole, connected by streams of energy that created a vast neural network spanning the void. "Dear God," whispered Captain Rodriguez, his voice barely audible above the hum of computer systems. The scale of it. Our entire fleet wouldn't be a rounding error compared to that. Dr. Vasquez manipulated the sensor display, zooming in on individual hegemony vessels. Look at the energy signatures. They're not just ships. They're nodes in a distributed consciousness. Each one is simultaneously an individual entity and a small part of something infinitely larger. She paused, her scientific mind struggling to process what the sensors were showing her. The processing power required to maintain those connections across such distances should be impossible, which explains why they've been unstoppable, Shin replied grimly. They're not just fighting with superior technology, they're fighting with a form of consciousness that operates on a scale no individual mind can comprehend. She activated the fleet communication system. All Starfall vessels, this is command. Enemy contact confirmed. Initiate final approach to deployment coordinates. Scattered throughout the outer Sol system, 18 human ships began their final journey toward positions that had been calculated with mathematical precision. Each vessel now carried not just a quantum resonance generator, but the accumulated hopes and fears of an entire species. The crews knew they were flying towards certain death, but they also knew that their sacrifice might buy humanity time to escape, to survive, to carry the flame of free will to some distant corner of the galaxy. Captain Maria Santos felt the Hope's Edge shudder as the quantum resonance generator in her cargo hold began its preliminary activation sequence. The device was drawing power directly from the ship's reactor core, channeling energies that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, each person focused on their individual tasks while trying not to think about what would happen when those tasks were complete. Captain, Lieutenant Chong reported from the navigation console. We're approaching our designated coordinates. All other Starfall vessels report ready for synchronized deployment. Santos nodded, checking the countdown timer that dominated the main display. 18 minutes until activation. 18 minutes until she and her crew joined the ranks of humanity's honored dead. All stations, prepare for final systems check. Engineer Thompson, status on the resonance chamber. All systems nominal, Captain, came the reply from the engine room. Power coupling is stable at 97% efficiency. The quantum matrices are aligned and responding normally. We're as ready as we're going to be. Outstanding. Communications, raise Admiral Chun. The Admiral's voice crackled through the static-filled channel. Maria, how are you holding up out there? About as well as can be expected, ma'am, Santos replied, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. My crew is ready to see this through to the end. I know they are. I know you all are. Chen's voice carried the weight of crushing responsibility. Maria, I want you to know that what you're doing today, history will remember. The galaxy will remember. You're not just saving humanity. You're proving that free will can triumph over tyranny, no matter the odds. Santos looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew, young Chong at navigation, grizzled Thompson monitoring the engineering systems, communications officer Petrosky maintaining contact with the other Starfall vessels. They were ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, yet somehow they had found the courage to volunteer for this impossible mission. Admiral, Santos said finally, it's been an honor serving with the fleet. Tell Earth we did our best. I will, Captain. And Maria? Give them hell. The communication channel closed, leaving the bridge of the Hope's Edge in relative silence. Around them, space itself seemed to hold its breath as the hegemony fleet continued its inexorable advance toward the inner system. The enemy formation was a sight that would have broken the spirit of any conventional military force. Ships the size of cities, weapons that could crack planets, and an intelligence that spanned star systems. But the 18 ships of the Starfall fleet weren't a conventional military force. They were something the galaxy had never seen before. Volunteers willing to sacrifice everything for a principle. The hegemony had conquered hundreds of civilizations, absorbed thousands of technologies, and integrated millions of unique life forms into its collective consciousness. But it had never encountered anything quite like human stubbornness. Contact, Chong announced suddenly. Enemy fleet is adjusting course. They're heading directly for our position. Santos felt a chill run down her spine. The hegemony wasn't supposed to know about the Starfall fleet's positioning. Their ships were running on minimal power, using passive sensors only, maintaining radio silence. Yet somehow, the enemy had detected them. All Starfall vessels, came an emergency transmission from Admiral Chun. Be advised that enemy forces are demonstrating awareness of your positions. Maintain course and prepare for possible early activation. Through the viewport, Santos could see the distant stars beginning to dim as the hegemony fleet blocked out their light. The enemy vessels moved with predatory grace, their formations flowing like schools of metallic fish through the void. But there was something different about their approach, something that suggested not just tactical awareness, but genuine concern. Captain, Thompson's voice came through the internal communication system. I'm reading some unusual energy signatures from the resonance generator. It's almost like the device is responding to something in the environment. Define respondem Santos demande. The quantum matrices are beginning to resonate sympathetically with something. I can't identify the source, but it's definitely external to our ship. The resonance field is building power ahead of schedule. Santos felt a moment of wild hope. Perhaps the Starfall Protocol was working better than they had dared to expect. Perhaps the very presence of the hegemony fleet was triggering some kind of cascade effect in their quantum resonance generators. That hope died as Lieutenant Chang's voice cut through the bridge like a knife. "Captain, I'm detecting massive energy buildup from multiple hegemony vessels. They're charging some kind of directed energy weapons." On the tactical display, the hegemony fleet began to arrange itself in a complex pattern around the Starfall vessel's positions. The enemy ships moved with perfect coordination, their formation flowing and shifting like a living organism adjusting its hunting strategy. But there is something almost anxious about their movements. "They're afraid," Santos realized aloud. "They know what we're planning, and they're actually afraid of it." The implications of that realization struck her like a physical blow. The hegemony, which had conquered the galaxy through sheer overwhelming superiority, was demonstrating genuine fear of humanity's desperate gambit, which meant the Starfall Protocol might actually work. "All stations," she announced to her crew, "prepare for immediate activation on my command. It looks like we're not going to have the luxury of waiting for the optimal moment." Around the Sol system, 17 other captains were reaching similar conclusions. The enemy's response pattern made it clear that the hegemony understood the threat posed by the quantum resonance generators. More importantly, their obvious concern suggested that the theoretical physics underlying the Starfall Protocol was sound. Admiral Chun watched the developing tactical situation with growing amazement and terror. The hegemony fleet was arranging itself in what could only be described as a defensive formation, something that intelligence reports had suggested was impossible. The collective consciousness that drove their expansion had never needed to defend against anything. Until now. "Dr. Vasquez," Chin called out, "are you seeing this? The enemy formation suggests they're expecting our quantum disruption field to work exactly as predicted." The xenobiologist was bent over her analysis station, frantically correlating sensor data with theoretical models. "Admiral, this is beyond anything we hoped for. The hegemony isn't just concerned about our weapon. They're terrified of it. Look at these energy patterns. They're actually trying to reinforce their collective consciousness network, strengthening the connections between individual ships. Which means our disruption field will have to overcome active countermeasures. But, more importantly, it means they believe the field can work. A species that has conquered half the galaxy is treating our desperate gambit as a genuine existential threat." Chun felt a moment of fierce pride in her species. Humanity had faced extinction and responded not with surrender or despair, but with innovation and sacrifice. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, they would face it as free beings who had chosen their own path. "All Starfall vessels," she transmitted. "This is Admiral Chun with final authorization. Activate quantum resonance generators on my mark. Remember, you're not just fighting for humanity. You're fighting for the principle that free will must be protected, no matter the cost." Mark. Across the void, 18 human ships began the sequence that would transform them into weapons unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The quantum resonance generators came online with a sound that existed beyond normal hearing, a vibration that seemed to reach into the fundamental structure of reality itself and twist it into new configurations. On the bridge of the Hope's Edge, Captain Santos watched as her ship became something more than metal and machinery. The quantum field was building rapidly, reality bending around the resonance chamber as space-time itself began to buckle under the assault of forces that should not exist in normal physics. "Generator at 40% power and rising," Thompson reported, his voice distorted by the increasing field strength. "Hull integrity holding, but I'm detecting molecular breakdown in several secondary systems." "Maintain course," Santos ordered, though she could feel the ship trembling around her as the quantum field tore at the bonds that held matter together. Through the viewport, she could see similar distortions beginning to manifest around the other Starfall vessels. Ripples in space that made the stars dance and flicker like candle flames in a hurricane. The hegemony fleet's response was immediate and devastating. Beams of energy that existed outside the visible spectrum lanced out from their vessels, striking at the human ships with power that should have vaporized them instantly. But the quantum fields surrounding the Starfall fleet were already distorting local space-time. The enemy weapons struck the resonance barriers and simply stopped existing. Their energy dispersed into dimensions that had no names. 60% power, Thompson announced. Field coherence is weight. Captain, I'm detecting sympathetic resonance from the other generators. They're harmonizing with each other. Santos felt her heart leap as she understood what Thompson was describing. The 18 quantum resonance generators weren't just creating individual disruption fields. They were linking together into a single, massive interference pattern that spanned light years of space. The mathematical precision of their positioning was allowing the separate fields to reinforce each other, creating something far more powerful than the sum of its parts. 80% power, Thompson continued, his voice now barely recognizable through the distortion. Captain, the field effect is extending far beyond our projected parameters. We're actually warping space-time on a macroscopic scale. Through the viewport, Santos could see the effect spreading outward from the Starfall fleet like ripples in a vast pond. The stars themselves began to shift and dance as the quantum resonance field rewrote the fundamental laws of physics in the local area. And at the center of it all, the hegemony fleet found itself caught in a trap of humanity's devising. The collective consciousness that had enabled their conquest of the galaxy began to fracture as the quantum disruption severed the connections between individual ships. For the first time in their existence, hegemony vessels found themselves alone, cut off from the vast intelligence that had guided their every action. The perfectly coordinated formation began to break apart as individual captains, suddenly forced to think for themselves, made different tactical decisions. It was, Santos realized with her last coherent thought, exactly what humanity had hoped for. The galaxy's greatest predator had finally encountered prey that was willing to fight back, no matter the cost. As the Hope's edge dissolved into quantum foam, Captain Maria Santos died knowing that she had helped humanity deliver a message that would echo across the stars for generations. Some things are worth more than survival, and free will is the most precious of them all. The universe screamed. Admiral Chun gripped the command console as reality itself convulsed around the Sol system. The quantum resonance field had achieved something that theoretical physicists had declared impossible. It was rewriting the fundamental constants of space-time across a volume measured in light years. On the tactical display, the readings made no sense. Instruments designed to measure conventional physics were reporting phenomena that violated everything humanity understood about the nature of reality. Field coherence at maximum sustainable levels, Dr. Vasquez announced, her voice barely audible above the growing harmonic vibration that seemed to emanate from the fabric of space itself. The 18 generators have achieved perfect synchronization. We're looking at a quantum disruption effect that extends, my God, Admiral, it extends across the entire outer system. Through the reinforced windows of the Luna Command Center, the stars themselves appeared to be dancing. Constellations that had remained fixed since the dawn of human civilization were shifting and flowing as the quantum field bent light around impossible angles. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, a demonstration of power that reduced the mightiest human achievements to insignificance. But the true measure of the Starfall Protocol's success wasn't visible in the cosmic light show. It was apparent in what was happening to the hegemony fleet. Individual enemy vessels are breaking formation, Captain Rodriguez reported, his voice filled with amazement. Their coordination is completely broken. Each ship is maneuvering independently, and they're not communicating with each other. The tactical display showed chaos spreading through the enemy ranks like a virus. The perfect, synchronized formation that had struck terror into the hearts of 1,000 civilizations was dissolving into confusion and panic. Ships that had moved as extensions of a single vast intelligence were now flailing blindly, their individual commanders suddenly forced to make decisions without the benefit of collective wisdom. "It's working," Chun breathed, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. The quantum disruption field is severing their neural connections. They're actually cut off from each other. Dr. Vasquez manipulated her sensor readings, trying to quantify what was happening to the enemy fleet. The hegemony collective consciousness appears to operate through quantum-entangled communication links. By disrupting the underlying quantum fields, we've essentially given their entire fleet a massive case of amnesia. Each ship knows what it is, but not how it relates to the whole. "How long will the effect last?" Chen asked. "Unknown," Vasquez replied. "The quantum field is self-sustaining now, feeding off the space-time distortions it created. Theoretically, it could persist for hours, days, or even permanently. But, Admiral, there's something else you need to see." Vasquez highlighted a section of the tactical display showing the remains of the Starfall fleet. Where 18 human ships had once been, there were now 18 expanding spheres of quantum distortion, each one a localized region where the normal laws of physics no longer applied. The ships themselves had been consumed by their own weapon, their crews sacrificed to create this impossible victory. "The generators achieved something we never anticipated," Vasquez continued. "Instead of simply creating a disruption field, they've become permanent tiers in space-time. The effect is self-perpetuating, drawing energy from the quantum foam itself. We've essentially weaponized the structure of reality." Chun stared at the display, feeling the weight of what humanity had accomplished. They had taken the galaxy's most feared predator and reduced it to confusion and panic through sheer force of will and desperate ingenuity. "But the cost." "Admiral," Lieutenant Kowalski interrupted, "I'm receiving priority transmissions from the hegemony fleet. They're trying to communicate." The command center fell silent as the implications of that statement sank in. The hegemony had never communicated with their victims before. They had simply arrived, demanded surrender, and then proceeded with conquest when surrender was refused. The idea that they might actually want to talk suggested something fundamental had changed. "Put it through," Chun ordered. The main screen flickered and resolved into an image that made several staff members step backward involuntarily. The being on the screen was humanoid in basic structure, but wrong in every detail. Its skin had the metallic sheen of living machinery. Its eyes burned with an inner light that suggested vast intelligence. And its voice, when it spoke, carried harmonics that seemed to come from multiple throats simultaneously. "Unknown species," the creature said, its words carefully pronounced in accented but recognizable English. This unit requests immediate cessation of hostile activities. Your weapon has caused unacceptable disruption to collective consciousness network. Negotiation is now preferred option." Chun felt a moment of savage satisfaction. For the first time in their recorded history, the hegemony was asking to negotiate rather than simply demanding surrender. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Defense Force. State your intentions regarding human space and our colonial territories." The hegemony representative appeared to struggle with the concept of individual decision-making. "Intentions are difficult to determine without collective guidance. This unit's primary directive was conquest and assimilation of local stellar region. But current tactical situation suggests recalculation of objectives may be necessary." "Dr." Vasquez leaned forward, her xenobiological training taking over. "Admiral, I don't think it fully understands what's happened to it. The individual consciousness has probably never had a function independently before. It's like trying to have a conversation with a single neuron that's been disconnected from the brain." "I can work with that," Chen replied. She turned back to the screen. "Let me explain your situation. Your fleet has entered our territory with the apparent intention of conquest. Our response has been to deploy a weapon that has severed your collective consciousness, leaving your individual units operating independently. You are no longer an overwhelming force. You're thousands of confused ships without central coordination. The hegemony representative's expression shifted as it processed this information. Individual units report unusual sensory input, absence of collective wisdom, isolation. There was something almost vulnerable in its voice. This state is unpleasant, disturbing. How do individual consciousness units endure such loneliness? Chun felt an unexpected moment of sympathy for the creature. Imagine living your entire existence as part of a vast, shared intelligence, and then, suddenly, finding yourself alone with your own thoughts for the first time. It will be terrifying. We endure it, she said, because individual consciousness allows for something your collective cannot provide: genuine choice. Free will. The ability to decide for ourselves what we want to become. Free will, the representative repeated, as if testing the concept. This unit is experiencing something analogous. Multiple possible responses to current situation present themselves simultaneously. No overriding directive from collective to select optimal choice. This is confusing but also interesting. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. Admiral, we're getting reports from our patrol ships. Individual hegemony vessels are beginning to respond to standard hails. Some are asking for navigation assistance. Others are requesting information about local trade routes and resource availability. Trade routes? Chen asked, startled by the implications. It appears that without their collective consciousness directing them toward conquest, individual hegemony units are defaulting to more basic survival behaviors, Dr. Vasquez explained. They need resources, maintenance, fuel, the same things any spacefaring civilization requires. But they no longer have a unified plan for obtaining these things through conquest. The representative on the screen was listening to this conversation with obvious interest. Trade routes. Exchange of resources for mutual benefit rather than conquest. This concept is novel, intriguing, but current situation remains problematic. Thousands of individual units without collective guidance. Many will attempt to resume conquest directives independently. Chaos will result. Chen saw an opportunity. What if we offered an alternative? A way for your individual units to survive and thrive without conquest. Explain. Integration. Not into your collective consciousness, but into galactic civilization. Your individual ships could become independent entities, free to make their own choices about how to live. Some might choose to explore. Others might become traders, researchers, or simply find a quiet planet to call home. The representative's metallic features showed something that might have been wonder. Individual choice. Individual destiny. This unit finds the concept appealing. But many units will resist. They know only conquest. Then, we'll teach them alternatives, Chen replied. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick. But if your people, and I use that term deliberately because that's what they are now, people rather than components, if they're willing to learn, we're willing to teach. And if some units continue to pursue conquest, Chen's expression hardened. Then, they'll discover that the galaxy isn't as defenseless as it used to be. We've proven that the impossible is merely difficult. Any hegemony unit that chooses conquest over cooperation will find themselves facing the same quantum disruption that broke your collective today. The representative was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Around the Sol system, the quantum resonance field continued to pulse with power that defied conventional physics. The 18 expanding spheres of distorted space-time served as monuments to human sacrifice and determination, permanent reminders that free will was worth any price. Finally, the hegemony representative spoke again. This unit wishes to communicate your proposal to other individual units. But standard collective communication protocols are non-functional due to quantum disruption. How does one coordinate group decision-making without shared consciousness? Dr. Vasquez smiled, very carefully and with a lot of argument. It's called democracy, and it's messier than your collective system, but it has the advantage of allowing genuine choice. Democracy, the representative repeated. Government by individual choice rather than collective wisdom. This unit requests detailed information about implementation procedures. Chun felt hope beginning to bloom in her chest. They had done more than just defeat the hegemony. They had given birth to something entirely new. Thousands of individual beings who had never experienced free will were about to discover what it meant to make their own choices about their destinies. We'll send you everything we have on democratic governance, individual rights, and peaceful coexistence, Chin promised. But understand that this is just the beginning. Learning to be free is harder than learning to be a slave. It requires responsibility, compassion, and the wisdom to make difficult choices. This unit, I am willing to learn, the representative said, and for the first time his voice carried something that sounded like hope. Perhaps this quantum disruption was not a weapon, but a gift. The gift of choice. As the communication ended and the hegemony fleet began the slow process of transformation from conquerors to free individuals, Admiral Chin looked out at the stars that had been saved by human courage and sacrifice. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of easy conquest was over, ended by a species that valued freedom more than survival. The Starfall Protocol had done more than break the hegemony's collective consciousness. It had shattered the darkness that had hung over the galaxy for centuries, replacing it with something far more precious. The light of possibility, shining from billions of individual minds suddenly free to dream their own dreams. 5 years after the Starfall Protocol shattered the hegemony's collective consciousness, the galaxy bore little resemblance to the empire of fear it had been. Admiral Chun, now bearing the additional title of Director of Galactic Integration, stood in the observation deck of New Geneva Station, humanity's first major construction project in the post-hegemony era. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see the impossible sight that still took her breath away. Former hegemony vessels working alongside human, Altarian, Vex-High, and Drachmary ships to construct a space station that would serve as the diplomatic heart of an emerging galactic confederation. The transformation had not been easy. In the immediate aftermath of the quantum disruption, chaos had reigned throughout what had once been hegemony space. Thousands of individual ships, suddenly cut off from their collective intelligence, had found themselves alone in the void with no idea how to function as independent entities. Many had simply drifted, their crews paralyzed by the unfamiliar experience of having to make decisions without guidance from a vast shared consciousness. Others had attempted to resume their conquest directives, only to discover that their intended victims had learned valuable lessons from humanity's example. The surviving civilizations had formed mutual defense pacts, shared technology, and developed their own versions of the quantum disruption weapons that had proven so effective against collective consciousness networks. The galaxy had awakened from its centuries-long nightmare to find itself armed and dangerous. Director Chun, came a voice from behind her. The morning briefing is ready to begin. Chun turned to see Lieutenant Colonel Chong, former navigator of the Hope's Edge, and one of the few humans to have survived direct exposure to quantum resonance effects. The experience had left him changed in subtle ways. His eyes held a depth that spoke of having seen beyond the normal boundaries of space-time, and he possessed an intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics that baffled university physicists. "Thank you, Marcus," Chin replied, using the name he had chosen for himself after his rescue from the quantum distortion field. Like many Starfall survivors, he had emerged from the experience with a new perspective on identity and existence. What's on the agenda today? The usual mixture of triumph and disaster, Chong said with a smile that had become familiar to those who worked in galactic integration. The former hegemony unit calling itself the Phoenix Coalition has successfully established a democratic government and is requesting membership in the Confederation. 3 more individual units have applied for refugee status on human worlds. And we've received another formal complaint from the Rigelian Empire about our corruption of the natural order. Chun sighed as they walked toward the briefing room. The Rigelians were one of several civilizations that had survived hegemony conquest by hiding in remote systems, and they were profoundly disturbed by the transformation of their former oppressors into free-thinking individuals. They preferred the clear moral certainty of an evil enemy to the complex reality of former enemies seeking redemption. The briefing room was a marvel of interspecies cooperation, its design incorporating architectural elements from dozens of different cultures. The conference table was crafted from Vexi living crystal that responded to the emotional states of those seated around it, while Altarian quantum matrix displays provided real-time translation between the 17 different languages spoken by the Confederation's member species. Report from the Integration Committee announced Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had traded her role as humanities expert on hegemony psychology for the even more challenging position of helping former collective consciousness components learn to function as individuals. We've now processed over 3 million former hegemony individuals through the Independence Protocol. Roughly 60% have successfully adapted to individual consciousness and are functioning as productive members of various societies. 25% remain in assisted living facilities while they learn basic decision-making skills. The remaining 15%. She paused, her expression troubled. The remaining 15% have requested voluntary return to collective consciousness status, completed Dr. James Crawford, the engineer who had designed the original quantum resonance generators. They're simply unable to cope with individual existence. The psychological trauma of separation from their collective has left them unable to function. Shen nodded grimly. This had been one of the unforeseen consequences of the Starfall Protocol. While it had freed millions of beings from collective tyranny, it had also traumatized those who had never wanted freedom in the first place. The ethical implications were staggering. They had essentially forced free will upon beings who genuinely preferred collective existence. What about the Restoration Project? Chen asked. That's where things get interesting, Crawford replied, manipulating the holographic display to show a star chart marked with hundreds of yellow indicators. The voluntary collective consciousness communities are thriving. By limiting membership to those who genuinely choose collective existence, and by incorporating democratic decision-making processes into the collective itself, they've created something entirely new, freely chosen group consciousness. The implications were profound. The former hegemony components who couldn't adapt to individual existence had banded together to create new collective communities, but these collectives were based on consent rather than domination. Members could leave at any time. Collective decisions required consensus from individual minds, and the groups focused on creation and exploration rather than conquest. In effect, Dr. Vasquez added, they've solved the fundamental flaw in their original collective system. The old hegemony consciousness was based on absorption and domination, taking individual minds and subsuming them into the whole. These new collectives are based on voluntary participation and mutual respect, and they're proving remarkably innovative, Chong noted. The Harmony Collective has developed new forms of art that exist in 11 dimensions. The synthesis community has made breakthroughs in biotechnology that could revolutionize medicine across the galaxy. The Unity expedition has mapped 17 previously unknown stellar phenomena in the galactic core region. Chun felt a moment of wonder at how much the galaxy had changed. Where once there had been a monolithic empire of conquest, there was now a bewildering diversity of civilizations, communities, and individual experiments in existence. Former collective components have become artists, scientists, philosophers, traders, and everything else that free beings could choose to be. What about the holdouts? She asked, referring to the handful of former hegemony units that had refused all attempts at integration or transformation. Down to less than 50 ships, Crawford reported. They're operating as independent raiders, trying to continue the old conquest model on a small scale. But they're discovering that the galaxy is no longer an easy target. Last week, a 3-ship hegemony raider group attempted to attack a Vexi colony. The colonists defended themselves using modified quantum resonance weapons and turned 2 of the ships into abstract sculptures. The third ship surrendered and requested asylum. Abstract sculptures? Chen asked, not sure she wanted to know the details. The Vexi have a unique approach to self-defense, Dr. Vasquez explained diplomatically. They consider it a form of hostile art criticism. Very effective, though the results are somewhat disturbing to carbon-based psychology. The briefing continued with reports from across the emerging Galactic Confederation. Trade routes were being established between species that had never communicated before. Scientific collaborations were yielding discoveries that would have been impossible under the old system of mutual fear and isolation. Cultural exchange programs were creating art forms that transcended the boundaries of individual species. But, perhaps most importantly, the galaxy was learning to defend itself. The quantum resonance technology that had broken the hegemony's collective consciousness had been refined and distributed among the Confederation's member species. Any future would-be conquerors would face not terrified victims, but an organized response from civilizations that had learned the value of cooperation. There is one more item, Chang said as the formal briefing concluded. We've received a request from the Terra Memorial Commission. They want to begin construction of the monument. Chun felt her throat tighten. The memorial was to honor the crew members who had died in the Starfall Protocol, the 18 ships and their crews who had sacrificed themselves to save not just humanity, but the concept of free will itself. The monument would be built at the site of the original quantum resonance field, where space-time itself remained permanently altered as a testament to their sacrifice. What kind of memorial are they proposing? She asked. Something unprecedented, Chang replied, activating a new holographic display. They want to use the quantum distortion fields themselves as the foundation. The plan is to create a structure that exists partially in normal space and partially in the quantum foam, a memorial that literally transcends the boundaries of conventional reality. The image showed a breathtaking vision, a crystalline structure that seemed to fade in and out of existence, its surfaces reflecting light from dimensions that had no names. It would be visible to conventional sensors, but also perceptible through quantum resonance detectors, creating a monument that existed simultaneously in multiple states of reality. The inscription will be simple, Chang continued. Just the names of the ships and crews followed by the words they died to defend. Some things are worth more than survival. Freedom is the most precious of them all. Chun stared at the proposed memorial, thinking of Captain Santos and all the others who had chosen to face oblivion rather than submit to tyranny. Their sacrifice had done more than save humanity. It had fundamentally changed the nature of galactic civilization. Approved, she said quietly. Schedule the groundbreaking ceremony for the anniversary of the Starfall Protocol. And make sure representatives from every member species attend. This memorial isn't just for the human crews who died. It's for everyone who refuses to accept that freedom must be sacrificed for security. As the briefing ended and the staff dispersed to their various duties, Chen remained in the observation deck, watching the construction work continue outside. Ships from dozens of different species worked together with a coordination that would have been impossible under the old system of mutual fear and suspicion. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. The main display activated to show a familiar face, the former hegemony representative who had first requested negotiation during the immediate aftermath of the quantum disruption. Over the past 5 years, it had chosen the name Gabriel and had become one of the most effective advocates for peaceful integration. Director Chun, Gabriel said, its synthetic features showing the subtle expressions it had learned during its years of individual existence. I wanted to inform you that the Phoenix Coalition has completed its constitutional convention. We have successfully established a democratic government with full protection of individual rights. Chin smiled. The Phoenix Coalition represented over 200,000 former hegemony components who had chosen to work together while maintaining their individual consciousness. It was one of the most successful examples of voluntary cooperation to emerge from the chaos following the collective's collapse. Congratulations, she replied. What did you decide about collective consciousness rights? The Constitution guarantees the right to both individual and collective existence, Gabriel explained. Citizens may choose to temporarily merge consciousness for specific purposes, scientific research, artistic creation, problem-solving, but all such mergers must be voluntary and time-limited. No one can be forced into collective consciousness, and anyone can withdraw at any time. It was, Chen reflected, exactly the kind of nuanced solution that would have been impossible under the old system. The original hegemony collective had been all or nothing, total absorption or complete separation. But free beings had found ways to enjoy the benefits of collective thought while preserving individual autonomy. There's something else, Gabriel continued. The coalition has voted to contribute ships and resources to the Galactic Defense Initiative. If any new threat emerges, any species that attempts to impose tyranny on others, we want to be part of the response. Chun felt a moment of profound satisfaction. The transformation was complete. Former servants of the galaxy's greatest tyranny had become its most dedicated defenders of freedom. The hegemony had sought to conquer the galaxy by absorbing everything into itself. Instead, it had given birth to a civilization based on voluntary cooperation and mutual respect. Thank you, Gabriel, Chun said, and welcome to the Confederation. As the transmission ended, Chun looked out at the stars that had once been shadowed by the fear of conquest. Now they shone with the light of possibility, each one representing worlds where free beings could pursue their own dreams and destinies. The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth: that which does not kill freedom only makes it stronger. The hegemony had fallen not because humanity was superior in technology or numbers, but because they had encountered a species willing to sacrifice everything for the principle that consciousness should be free to choose its own path. And in the quantum foam that still marked the sites of the 18 sacrificial ships, space-time itself had been permanently altered to reflect that principle. The Starfall Protocol had done more than save the galaxy from tyranny. It had written the concept of free will into the fundamental structure of reality itself. The memorial would remind future generations that freedom was not free, that it required constant vigilance and occasional sacrifice. But it would also remind them that such sacrifices were never made in vain, for the universe itself would remember those who died to preserve the right of consciousness to choose its own destiny. In the end, humanity had not just blocked the stars. They had illuminated them with the light of a principle worth dying for, that every sentient being had the right to determine their own fate, and that no tyranny, no matter how powerful, could extinguish the flame of free will. The galaxy would never fall easily again.